Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham here. And boy, I lucked into this interview with Lisa Vedernikova Khanna. We were supposed to talk a couple of weeks back. I had a scheduling conflict. We had to rearrange. And now, Lisa, we've got some big news to share. You've been sharing this all day. You had a column in Marie Claire. You've got a video that's online. But not only are you running for Congress in the first district now of Virginia, but you're going to be adding to your family.
That's right. First child, 6 months pregnant, daughter to come in February of 2026. My husband and I are very excited, and I'm doing it all this year. The theme of this year is that I'm doing it all.
I mean, it's not hard enough to run for Congress. It's not hard enough to have a kid. I mean, each of those independently are very, very difficult things, but now you're doing it all at the same time. Um, but it brings, so much into, full circle. I mean, it's one thing to say, right, like right now, the shutdown is ongoing. We're in day 14 of the federal government shutdown. Democrats are pressing for Republicans to undo the massive cuts to health care. I mean, this is all stuff that not only are you going to be, running from a policy position, policy perspective on talking about these things, but it's also something that you're going to be very intimately familiar with because of the pregnancy.
That's right. Yeah. So, for me personally, I grew up the daughter of an undocumented immigrant. My mom, got her papers a couple of years ago, but my mom came to America from Soviet Russia in the early 90s and raised me on her own, working as a housekeeper and a nanny. And I myself relied on Medicaid and public schools and free lunch programs and ultimately Pell Grants to build my own American dream. And those were really the building blocks for me. And that experience, my lived experience, really shaped my worldview and also my policy priorities, which are now obviously incredibly relevant, whether we're talking about the big, beautiful bill or whether we're talking about the government shutdown. And to me, it's really important to talk about the pregnancy, not only because I'm 6 months pregnant, so I'm running out of clothes that can shield it, but also because it is another lived experience that much of the world faces, much of the country faces. And I hear a lot from families across the district and across America that are really struggling with affordability and really struggling with healthcare. So, in addition to talking about this in the Marie Claire op ed that you mentioned in the video that I had today, I also rolled out a policy proposal today that specifically focuses on how we can make life more affordable for working families and also how we can make healthcare more accessible before, after, and during pregnancy. So that is something that I'm spending a lot of time focused on. And again, for me, the lived experience of it is what's really important. I think we have a lot of members of Congress right now in Washington, D.C., who have been elected but are so deeply removed from the problems that most Americans have to solve every single day because they just aren't their reality. They're quite wealthy, they're older. And I think it's really important to elect members of Congress who actually still have that proximity and still have that lived experience to be able to legislate to solve those problems for people.
Yeah, we have a president who's 79. Our previous, most recent president was in his 80s when he stepped down. A lot of our congressional leaders are in their 70s and 80s, and
Right.
yeah, like, far removed. And you're on the opposite side of that spectrum in the sense of being young. You're getting ready to start a family. I mean, in your Marie Claire article, you mentioned having to think through with your husband things like, paid leave, parental leave. I mean, you're going to be, having a baby in February in the midst of a primary campaign, a primary that's in June. So, I think you mentioned something about you went up to a constituent as you were out and about, and all of a sudden, you had it in your mind what you were going to say, and then, it's pregnancy time, so a little bit of sickness kicks in. I mean, all these things play into, the real life experience. Talk about your policy, the policy rollout you made today, and maybe how it's been shaped by the fact that you're, now telling us you're 6 months pregnant. I mean, you've had a lot of time to think about this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true. I am running for Congress full time. I think I'm the only person in my race doing that, and there are a lot of advantages to that. Running for Congress is, quite the endeavor, and so running for Congress full time allows me to be able to talk to people in my community as much as possible, which is the most important thing to me, and of course fundraise, which is a necessary evil in politics, but it also comes with a lot of difficulties, right? We simply do not have the infrastructure in this country to make it easy for people to have kids and not have their benefits tied to their jobs. So again, I've mentioned this, but a couple of different buckets that are very important to me from a policy perspective for parents and families is healthcare and affordability. So, in terms of healthcare, some things that I would prioritize. The first is working to make sure that we do not have maternal care deserts. I have a suburban and a rural district, and particularly in the rural parts, particularly after the Big Beautiful Bill, we are experiencing things like the risk of a rural hospital shutting down. And that obviously means that you are going to have to drive over an hour to get your care, whether you're elderly, whether you're young, or whether you're a mother. And that is just not sustainable when you're going to the doctor at least monthly if you're having a healthy pregnancy, and then God forbid more than that. So, fighting to get funding back to rural hospitals, but also fighting to make sure that underserved parts of the community have the access to have maternal care in the clinics that already exist as part of that example for healthcare. Another example is, we should really focus on expanding access to family building. IVF, for example, is a really common thing that people now do. It is incredibly expensive. Even Donald Trump talked on his campaign about expanding access to IVF. It should not only be a privilege for people who can get naturally pregnant to get naturally pregnant. We should be helping people start families. That is, I think, a bipartisan issue. I think everyone talks about the importance of having a family in this country. So we need to make it easier from a healthcare perspective. Another thing that I think we've been talking a lot about, especially in light of the shutdown that you mentioned, is the ACA. So I'd really like to focus on lowering out-of-pocket costs for things like visits and medicine and recurring care, and really fighting to strengthen the ACA and not do things like take away important tax subsidies. So those are some things that I would focus on in the healthcare bucket. And then the affordability bucket, which is a very large bucket to me, I hear a ton. I spend a ton of time out in the community. I announced something called the Lisa Listens Tour, which is a fun bit of alliteration over the summer, which just entails me going to all 18 localities in the district before this election day, so a full year before the general election for the seat. So I've sort of traveled far and wide in the district, so the suburban parts that are more populous and then the rural parts. And all I hear from people is about their healthcare, but also about how expensive life is. So the other thing that I'd love to focus on is affordability. And I think that can cover a wide span of issues. So, for example, I think that it's about time that we have a $15 an hour minimum wage in this country. And I think it's about time that we pass the PRO Act to support unions and support being able to have unions fight for the benefits that families need in order to have things like healthcare and in order to have things like leave. So those are a couple of things that are very important to me in affordability. I think fighting for the end of the crazy and unstrategic and horrible tariffs that we have is actually an affordability bit as well. Those tariffs have driven up the cost of diapers. They've driven up the cost of strollers. They've driven up the cost of essentials, and they're chaotic and unnecessary. And Congress's main role is to have oversight, and we need to have oversight over those tariffs. So that's another bit in the affordability bucket. Another thing that I mentioned to you was that I grew up on free lunches. I think that we need to support free lunches for all in America during the school year, during summer, during off cycles. I think it is wild that we have children start accruing debt in their school years for lunch. So that's another bucket of affordability to me. And what else am I missing? Oh, and then the final thing that I'll just say here, and this is all on my website, so I have even more detail. The final thing that I will say too, in terms of affordability, which is really important to me, is both establishing universal pre-K, which just makes childcare easier, simpler, cheaper for people, and also strengthening public schools. I am a product of public schools. Public schools are how I learned English when I was 6 years old. And we need to be investing in teachers. We need to be investing in students. We need to be sending money to public schools, not gutting the Department of Education, not gutting public schools, and not trying to have Republicans push vouchers nationally when we should really be focused on how we can enhance our public school experience.
It's so important. I mean, I have a lot of similar lived experience as you. My mother cleaned houses. I grew up humbly as well, free lunches in schools. My father, before my parents split, mowed lawns and painted houses. And so it's so important to have people who come from a working class background to represent that constituency in Congress. I don't know that we have a lot of folks who do, and even maybe some who used to represent that constituency, as you mentioned earlier, maybe so far away from that. And I think I see Mishka walking around in the background. Maybe is that
That's right. Yeah,
right?
Mishka just walked away. Mishka, for those who don't know, means pleasure in Russian. I'm Russian Ukrainian. So yeah, she's scurrying away. We're lucky if she doesn't start barking. She's very
Oh, I'm fortunate to work from home. I've got dogs not in this room right now, but they're walking all over the place. So that's
well.
that
They can
keeps
talk to him. They can take the podcast interview over from us if that happens.
it'd be a lot cuter anyway. So if that's the case, so I wanted to mention you. So you mentioned your mother, immigrating from the former Soviet Union back before the fall of the Soviet Union, and just getting her green card, her paperwork a couple years ago. I'm wondering from a perspective of what's going on now nationally with the ICE situation. I mean, all the what Donald Trump and his administration do with ICE. Is there a concern there that, gosh, I mean, they're not stopping at what they said during the campaign, criminal, illegal, undocumented people, and that kind of thing. I mean, I've got friends who have all their legal paperwork in place, and we're still scared for them. I'm wondering if that's something that hits home for you as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I have been really interested in policy since I was quite young. And the reason for that is because of our humble beginnings. I think when you rely on the things that both you and I relied on growing up, you sort of start to think about government more profoundly than other kids who don't have to think about it in that way do. And part of that for me was immigration, right? ICE was established after 9/11. And so when I was a kid, I would already live in fear of my mom getting deported. And that is even more of a stark reality now than it even was when I was a child, which is hard for me to believe. And I'm really just lucky that my mom got her green card a couple of years ago during the Biden era. But yeah, it's certainly still a reality to me. We're seeing people who are Americans get thrown out of the country, right? So of course it's a major thing that I think about. And I'm going to be really blunt here. I am clearly white, and I think there is a privilege with that, right? Like my mom is from Eastern Europe. She's not from Latin America or Central America, and I think that is a different reality. So I spend a lot of time certainly thinking about my mom, and that was a part of even running for this campaign and talking about it publicly. I of course got my mom's permission. We discussed the risks, but I spend a lot of time talking about everyone who is going to school and coming back from school and their dad's not home because their dad was picked up by ICE while he was working, or going to work outside of Lowe's at their food vendor job and they are suddenly hugging a tree because they're getting pulled off away from their cart by ICE unnecessarily. These are people who contribute to the economy, who are important to their community, who are here looking for a sustainable way to be here, but this country has not had reasonable immigration reform in a very long time. And I think we can talk about the need for humane, sustainable immigration reform while also talking about how, sure, we of course need to have safe and secure borders. So all of this is something that I think about a lot, and I really empathize with. And the other part for me too is that my husband is also first generation American. His parents, my in-laws, immigrated from India. We are citizens because we were born here, and Donald Trump of course is going after birthright citizenship as well, which to me is a profoundly American, philosophically American concept, that if you're born here, you're as American as someone who came over on the Mayflower. So I worry a ton about ICE. And of course, they're not stopping at violent criminals. And I never thought that they would, unfortunately. And I worry about what this means for those of us who are already here and are American, and what it looks like to have the fight at the Supreme Court level over birthright citizenship.
I want to also ask, you mentioned your background as a Ukrainian Russian American, with the obvious continued Ukraine Russian war, Russia invading in 2022, but also, I mean, dating back to 2014 and the historical struggle for Ukraine to maintain its independence. Your thoughts on that, and how the U.S. can play a role in helping Ukraine preserve not only its independence but regain lost territories.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So, Russian is my first language. And, but the interesting thing is that, so my mom grew up in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. Um, and the Soviet Union and just Russian culture and Russian politics have had such a profound impact on her. There is no one more American than my mother, and there is no greater American patriot than my mother, because she saw what autocracy looked like. She saw what it looked like to grow up in a communist regime, and she sort of sees the residue of that now in Putinism. So I am staunchly, pro Ukraine. And I have been troubled, deeply, deeply troubled, how at times our president has handled the conflict, right? We went from Joe Biden, who was a real ally of Ukraine and Zelensky, to Donald Trump, who it depends on the day, right? We had a lot of days recently where we had Putin come to America and we literally rolled out the red carpet for Putin, which he then took home to Moscow and used it as a PR stunt that Americans love Putin, right? So that is a non starter for me. That is not how we should be handling Russia at all. I think that it seems like we're back on with Ukraine, and I would like for us to be providing for Ukraine strategy and advice on how they don't have to cede any ground and how they can soon end this conflict that I believe that Vladimir Putin is just selfishly pursuing. And also, bizarrely, unfortunately, many, many Russians have died in the process. And I think that it's, as Ukrainians, obviously, but even more Russians have died. And I think that it's time that we really end this war.
Yes, indeed, and it's hard to celebrate any minor even movement in the right direction with President Trump and his administration, unfortunately, because it seems like you said it depends on the day, and maybe the last person who has his ear as far as that goes. And I know his attention right now is on Israel and Gaza, but it's going to come back around probably pretty soon back to Ukraine and Russia.
I believe Zelensky is actually visiting the White House this week,
Okay.
at the end of the week. So we'll see what that amounts to. Hopefully, it's not similar to the meeting that he had in late winter earlier this year with JD Vance and President Trump.
And so I will start wrapping up here. As we're wrapping up, I wanted to mention I read in that Marie Claire article you wrote that's published today, that I think when you announced to your mom, when you told your mom, called her back in the spring to tell her you're getting ready to run for Congress, she thought maybe that call was about what your new news is, which is about the baby that's on the way. I think that's interesting that maybe now when you called her here recently, she so you're talking about your campaign again. I'm not sure, but. What's your mom's reaction to all of this? Running for Congress and now starting a family?
Well, in terms of starting a family, my mom couldn't be more thrilled. When I told my mom I was running for Congress in a very Eastern European way, she said, okay. And that was sort of the end of the conversation. Now I know that it was slight disappointment because she was hoping that I was pregnant. So first and foremost, my mom is very excited to be a grandmother. She has been, already trying to figure out what the pinkest outfit that she can buy for my daughter will be. And then my mom is incredibly supportive of my run for Congress. She has been, again, I'm running at some risk to her. And I remember when we were working on my website copy and working on sort of how we were going to talk about policy issues, I called her and I wanted to make sure that she was okay. And I was actually more anxious than she was. She was like, yeah, I'm totally game. The point of this is that I lived it and that people should understand the dangers of it. So she's just been really incredible in being generous with her story and also generous as just sort of a, sounding board support system behind the scenes. So very, very proud soon to be grandmother and also a great patriot, which I really mean. And she's really focused on making sure that America does not turn into Soviet Russia, which some days it feels like we are sliding into.
Oh yeah, very well said as we finish there. Well, Lisa Vedernikova Khanna running for the first district nomination, Democratic nomination. It's great to talk with you, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Yeah, likewise, Chris. This was lovely. Thanks so much. And I'm glad the dogs didn't interrupt us.